John Lewis, civil rights icon, has died at the age of 80. Um, all men die, and yet people are always shocked when it happens. John Lewis was at 80. Apparently, he was having a months long fight with cancer that inevitably ended with his demise. As you know, John Lewis was a civil rights icon, marching with King and so forth, getting knocked unconscious apparently at one of the marches on Selma, and was thrust, you can say, onto the stage, at the very least from the standpoint of domestic politics and maybe even international, at a very, very young age because of his willingness to do so. I look at this stuff in somewhat of an odd way. I kind of find these to be mechanical processes where society have people who are vigorously against inequality, even though they may accept a situation that they feel that they can't necessarily change or can't necessarily control. And through almost mechanical means, you have a probabilistic amount that are against it, and you have a smaller amount that vigorously are against it, so much so that they don't find it palpable to accept it. And they would find themselves pushed to the top just based on their own intent and based on their own will to change the situation, even if that demanded giving their bodies as sacrifice to do so. Even though that may be somewhat of a mechanical process and a way of society working itself out, it's still a small number of individuals that were willing to do it. And John Lewis was one of those people. So that takes nothing from him for the fact that there may be a mechanical process. There will be a lot of, let's say, accolades going forward for the next week dealing with John Lewis. And all things being equal, they're absolutely deserved. So, John Lewis dead at 80. Um, Going from, and I may have a separate show on Lewis, but devolving from something that is, more, you can make an argument, esoteric, but there's a physical dimension to this in regards to what was taking place in the 60s and 70s that Lewis was willing to put himself on the line for. But devolving from that level of willingness to do right and to do good, at least good in the sense of something that expands the rights and the freedoms of other people in your society, and going into something that is just sad, rather pathetic, appalling on multiple levels, and yet what we're stuck with dealing with because he is the person that was able to beat the stuffing out of Hillary Clinton to win office. Chris Wallace, who, despite being on Fox, has the tendency to care about his reputation enough to ask actually good questions and to peer into areas that many of the other hosts, like Hannity, would never venture into. Hannity is a company man. Chris Wallace is a company man most of the time, but every so often decides he needs to bulk up his credibility. This is one of those times. He's in an interview with Donald Trump that took place on Friday. And Donald Trump has been making an argument that Biden is basically being pushed by Sanders. That Sanders and AOC are behind Biden and turning the knobs. There would be nothing more that I would wish for. Do you think I enjoy being against Joe Biden when he's running for office, against somebody like Donald Trump? Don't enjoy it in the least. Do I find it somewhat necessary in order to push for certain political aims? Yes. Do I enjoy it? No. I would rather be here euphoric talking about the expansive policies in regards to healthcare, in regards to expanding of Social Security, elimination of all student debt for the various people. And even though Joe Biden has a climate plan out that's admirable, Joe Biden also just so happens to be a flagrant liar. And as a flagrant liar, I have no reason to believe that that particular climate plan is ever going to be pushed for. Just because somebody say, hey, I like this, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to die on the flag for it. Those are very different things. I have to believe that. And I'm sorry, a guy who flamed out of the campaign in the 80s for lying about civil rights and lying and plagiarizing speeches and his education record, and turned around and started to bring up the same lies that he flamed up back then for today, credibility is not there. So no, I don't enjoy this political climate where the Democrat is abhorrent, and is basically trying to skate on the criminal justice system that created the protests that are out there today, versus the man who you're going to see flip out when he's exposed on his basic lying on a network that he finds to be a safe haven. Donald Trump gets fact-checked by Chris Wallace, and he does not like it, and he reacts completely predictably for Donald Trump. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I saw this clip. Donald Trump has gained a lot of weight. Now, I could be wrong in that. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just looking at him, and you can't see it, but I have a secondary television. He looks huge in this clip. I have to compare it to what he was before. Either way, he's still thin-skinned, and that thin-skinnedness is on display. Let's take a look. Trump versus Wallace. It's a short clip, but it doesn't take long for him to go from zero to just losing it.
You've seen deaths up in New York, deaths up in Chicago, shootings. How do you explain it, and what are you going to do about it?
I explain it very simply by saying they're Democrat-run cities, they're liberally run, they're stupidly run.
Liberal Democrats have been running cities in this country for decades.
Poorly.
Why is it so bad right now?
They've run them poorly. It was always bad, but now it's gotten totally out of control, and it's really because they want to defund the police, and Biden wants to defund the police.
Sir, he does not.
Look, he signed a charter with Bernie Sanders.
It says nothing about defunding the
Oh,
police.
really? It says abolish. It says defund. Let's go.
All right.
Get me the charter, please.
All right. You've seen deaths.
Let's go. Give me the charter, please. Give me the charter. Joe Biden came out after that major call to defund the police and wanted to add more money, millions, I think it was 300 million or something, to the police. Basically giving an FU to the Black Lives Matter protesters. Now, I've said more than once that defund the police is too diminutive for the amount of people that were out in the streets, and that the issue you're really needing to hit at is the issue of poverty. If you look at the various demographics, just say you're sitting above it all. And as you're sitting above it all, looking at your reality, and you see that there are a lot of these areas that have just been abandoned and alienated. And you ask the basic question of, is crime incentivized in areas where there is economic inequality? And the answer becomes just yes. And if it's incentivized, and if it becomes a rational act, meaning you're comparing what I don't have, what I need, what I see that other people have in the way that they expose their wealth, in comparison to the potential for getting caught and the consequences of getting caught. And you start weighing those scales, well, it becomes somewhat of a rational action to commit some level of crime. Now, this is in areas, though, that have been abandoned. When people have the things that they need, it becomes somewhat of a rational act at that point to create a crime. If you've allowed a large amount of your society to basically be ensconced in poverty, when you have, 42%, nearly 50% of your society that are making $18,000 a year, that's extraordinary. You have no place in this country where people can live with a minimum wage job from the standpoint of paying and affording rent. That's horrific. You've systematically allowed poverty to be ensconced in your society, and that was before the pandemic, by the way. The very basic point I'm making here is, if you're looking at it and you're seeing a clear statistical bias in the sense of crime in communities that are abandoned versus ones that are not, then isn't the most basic thing in the world to say that the issue here is poverty, and we need to get rid of that in order to bring these communities out of the statistical bracket where it's incentivized into a statistical bracket that is not. That's not to say that you're going to eliminate everything, but it is to say that if you care about crime and, social upheaval and whatnot, that will be one of the main areas to which you target. Defund the police misses the point that cops are basically the poor thrown in to police the other poor. And there's a logic to cops that goes into the moment that you abandon communities, you need to do something about the fact that you abandon communities. And for people who don't necessarily want to pay their taxes and whatnot, especially when you get into the upper echelons of income, cops become an easier way to do that. This is one of the most shallow responses from a president I think I've ever heard. And Wallace is right for calling Trump on this BS because Trump is lying here. Joe Biden is not trying to defund the police. He may be trying to throw a lily out of something to the aspect of this particular upheaval of people who are pissed off. But understand, the grievances of the people that are in the streets are expanding. And it's not explicit to defund the cops. In fact, if you ask people just based on polling, what do they think people mean when they say defund the cops? It doesn't go into abolishing the cops. Most people who hear that just think they mean that the cops need to be retooled. The policing and how policing gets done needs to be reorganized. In fact, I had a guy here earlier today. He said the same thing. I strongly suspect he was a Trump supporter. And yet he didn't take defund the cops as being abolishment of the cops. He looked at it as, yeah, I can understand that the cop thing needs to be changed. And even went so far as to say, what happened to Floyd was horrible. What happened to Floyd was horrible. Meaning even he gets it on some level, like, yeah, that's pretty fucked up that happened. And that shouldn't happen. So the legitimacy of the protesters is there and is accepted by a large range of the community. And I have to admit, I ain't even shocked by that. And I don't think you get this shift in the public's perspective on this stuff within the course of a month or two that's so drastic. If the public didn't get it. Trump is on the wrong side of history on this. And you can look at his polling numbers. And even the fact that Chris Wallace is even asking him questions in this framing gets across to some degree that he is on the wrong side of this. I'll leave it here. I don't want this video to be long. I will say like, share, and of course, subscribe. I'm shocked that people are here this early in the morning on a Saturday. Good morning. Hello, everyone. My mom included. The Independent Chronicle, people are saying their hellos. Defund the police. Things first. You are a riot that they think element of radical and call for abolishment of the cops. So here's the thing. I don't think you can call for an abolishment of the cops if you don't deal with the reason and the logic that the cops were put there in the first place. Meaning, it's not so much that everyone who's in poverty turns to crime. That's nonsense. And it shouldn't even be the assumption. The thing is, you get a small element that does so because they find it to be a rational act. That's no different than you find people who were involved in the mafia or that were involved in corporate crime or corporate things where they find that, hey, I could get more money doing this even though I already have all the money in the world. There's going to be a probability, a percentage of people who take a certain perspective of things that are radically against the society itself. That's not the predominance. You're just talking about a small percentage of it. The catch becomes, how do you eliminate or even lower and make that small percentage that much more diminutive to the point where the cops and the reason for those cops becomes almost irrelevant. That's the point. And that's kind of the point that I get to when I aim and target poverty. I think that's the thing that's more important than the other aspect of things. But I'll leave it here because I want to get to other videos. I'm going to say like, share, and of course, subscribe.